The train did not stop. It surrendered. It shuddered. It ground to a halt. It let out one long breath of steam, the kind of breath a man lets out after carrying something too heavy for miles longer than he should have. Her hand closed around the seat rail. Closed until her knuckles went the color of the January sky outside the window. Inside her coat, a letter worn soft as cloth. $14.60. And a name she had just signed, a name that was not her own. The man at the end of the platform did not know what she was hiding. And her real name, if it were spoken aloud in a rail depot in the middle of Kansas, would make a certain kind of man's ears prick up. Out past the horizon, the wind that runs ahead of a storm was beginning to rise. The next train back wasn't due for 4 more days. She stepped down onto the platform. And the cold came up through the soles of her boots, as if the ground itself had teeth. The train did not so much arrive in Larkspur as it surrendered to it. It groaned. It shuddered. It let out one long exhausted breath of steam, the way a man breathes out after carrying something heavy for miles longer than he should have. And Josephine Reed stood in the aisle, with her hand wrapped so tight around the seat rail that her knuckles had gone the color of the January sky outside the window. Because that was the sound fear made, sometimes. Not screaming. Not tears. Just a woman standing very still, while a train stopped moving. Gid was asleep against her hip. 6 years old, and heavy the way only a sleeping child can be heavy, all of his weight given over to trust, no part of him bracing for what came next. She envied that. She had not slept a full night in 10 months. Not since the well collapsed. Not since a man came to the door, with his hat in his hands, and a look on his face that told her everything, before he said a word. She smoothed Gid's hair back from his forehead now, out of habit more than need, and looked down at him, and thought, not for the first time, that he had his father's chin. Which was a problem. Which was, in fact, the entire problem, folded down into one small stubborn feature on one small sleeping face. The letter was in her coat. Inside pocket, against the lining, where she'd kept it for 3 weeks, until the paper had gone soft as cloth. Widower. Sheep ranch outside Larkspur. Seeking a woman of steady character and willing disposition. She had read those words, until they stopped being words. Until they were just a shape her mind moved through, the way your feet find the stairs in the dark of your own house. Steady character. Willing disposition. She had both of those. She had also left out one detail, so large it could have swallowed the letter whole, and she had told herself the whole way, from Missouri, that this was not lying. It was simply not finishing a sentence. She had signed her maiden name. Reed. Not the name on the deed her husband's brother was still trying to pry out of a courthouse 2 counties back. Not the name that would make a certain kind of man's ears perk up if he heard it spoken in a rail depot in the middle of Kansas. Just Reed. Just a woman. Just, she made herself stop that thought before it finished, because finishing it made her hands shake, and her hands could not shake right now. Not with Gid's whole weight leaning into her side. Not with the conductor already moving down the aisle collecting the last of the passengers, with his eyes. She had $14.60 left in the inner pocket of her coat, folded flat and counted more times than she wanted to admit. She had done the arithmetic on the train, over and over, the way a person does arithmetic, when the number isn't going to change no matter how many times they add it up. $14.60, 1 trunk, and a boy who trusted her completely. That was the whole of what she had left in the world, that she could call entirely her own. Outside the window, Larkspur. A platform the color of old bone. 2 men stacking feed sacks like the world hadn't just changed for somebody. A sign, hand-lettered, sun-bleached down to almost nothing. Kansas in the dead of winter, which was its own kind of warning, if a person knew how to read weather the way she was learning to read weather. Flat. White. Endless. She woke Gid, with 2 fingers against his shoulder. "We're here," she said. He opened his eyes the way he always did, All at once, no drowsy in between, like a door swinging open. Is it the sheep place? It's the sheep place. Does he know I'm coming? And there it was. The question she had been outrunning, since Missouri, small and plain, and asked in the voice of a 6-year-old, who trusted that grown people told each other things. He's going to be very surprised, she said, which was true. Which was, God help her, the truest thing she'd said all week. She picked up the small bag. The trunk was in the baggage car, and it would have to wait, because right now there was a platform to walk across, and a stranger to find, and a story to hold together for just a little while longer. Just until they were somewhere warm. Just until she'd had time to explain it right. She stepped down onto the boards. The cold came up through the soles of her boots like the ground itself had teeth. Wyatt Sutton did not want to be standing on this platform. He had made peace with that fact 3 separate times since sunup, and each time the peace hadn't held, because here he still was. Hat pulled low. Collar up. Della's mittened hand in his, small and stubborn, the way everything about that girl was small and stubborn. He was not a man who wrote letters easily. He had rewritten his exactly once, crossed out sentimental words, put back in only the facts that mattered. Practical arrangement. Widower. Sheep ranch. He had not written need, though need was the truest word in the whole thing, and he had left it out on purpose, because a man does not put a word like need in a letter to a stranger, and expect to keep any dignity in the exchange. Now the train sat there steaming like something that had run itself half to death, and somewhere in it was a woman he had exchanged 11 letters with and met exactly 0 times, and he found that his jaw was tight enough to ache. Papa. Della tugged his sleeve. Is she gonna look like her letters? Letters don't have a look, Della. I know that. Which she said the way she said most things, like he was the slow one in the conversation, and she was simply being patient with him. I mean, is she gonna be nice like her letters? He didn't answer that. Because he didn't know. Because the last 3 women who'd come through that station gate had all sounded fine on paper too, and every one of them had lasted less time than it took the wool to grow back on a shorn ewe. Mrs. Ashwell. 6 weeks. Miss Coulter. 19 days. The third one hadn't even made it a full month before she stood in his kitchen and told him, not unkindly, that she had misjudged what kind of loneliness this was, and she was sorry, truly sorry, but she would be taking the next train back east. He had stopped writing their names down after that. No point keeping a ledger of failures. Della let go of his hand and stepped half a pace forward the way she did when she wanted a better look at something before deciding what to think of it. That was Della all over. Careful. Watching. 7 years old going on 40, because grief did that to a child, aged her up faster than it had any right to. And then Wyatt saw her. A woman coming across the platform, with a small bag, and a straight back, dark coat, dark hair coming loose from its pins in the wind, moving like someone who had decided in advance that she would not let this town see her falter. He noted it, the way he noted the gait of a new horse, before he decided whether to trust it with his weight. Steady on her feet, even on bad boards. Good sign. Then he saw what was walking beside her. A boy. Small. 6, maybe 7. Bundled in a coat 1 size too thin for this wind, holding tight to her hand, looking up at everything, with the wide, unguarded curiosity of a child who has not yet learned that new places can be dangerous. Wyatt Sutton felt something in his chest drop clean through the floor of him. She had a son. Nobody had said anything about a son. Mr. Sutton? She said it before he could decide what his own face was doing, which was probably for the best, because he wasn't entirely sure himself. Miss Reed. He heard his own voice come out flatter than he meant it. Flat like a door closing. You didn't mention. He stopped. Della was right there. Some things a man doesn't finish out loud in front of his own daughter, not even the true ones. This is Gideon, Josie said. Quick. Too quick, the way people talk, when they know the ground under a conversation has gone soft. My son! Everyone calls him Gid. The boy looked up at Wyatt, with an open, guileless face, and stuck out one small mittened hand like he'd been taught to. Are you the sheep man? Gid asked. And there was a beat. A long, cold beat, where Wyatt Sutton stood on a train platform in the wind, with a stranger's son offering him a handshake, and every plan he'd made for this day rearranged itself, without his permission. I am, Wyatt said. He shook the boy's hand, because there was nothing else a decent man could do, with it hanging there in the air. Then he looked at Josie. Looked at her the way he looked at a fence line, that had turned out to have rot in a post he trusted. Miss Reed. A word. He walked her a few paces off, out of the boy's hearing, if not quite out of Della's, though Della had her own gift for hearing things she wasn't meant to. You wrote 11 letters, Wyatt said. Low. Controlled, or trying to be. 11 letters, and not one line about a child. I know. That's not an answer. It's the honest one I've got right now. Her chin came up. He noticed that too, the way she didn't flinch off his eyes, even though everything about her posture said she was bracing for him to walk away. I was afraid, if I told you, you wouldn't write back at all. And I needed. She stopped herself. Actually stopped mid-sentence, like she'd caught her own foot on something. You needed, he said. Not a question. An invitation to finish it, or a dare. I needed somewhere for my son to be safe, she said. That's the whole of it. I'm not going to dress it up prettier than that. Behind them, the wind was picking up, the kind of wind that came ahead of weather, not after it. Wyatt had grown up under the sky long enough to read it the way other men read newspapers. And what it was telling him right now, plain as anything, was that a storm was maybe 2 hours out, and the last train back toward Missouri wasn't due, through Larkspur again for 4 days. Which meant this conversation, whatever it was going to be, had a clock on it, that had nothing to do with either of their feelings. I don't run a house for children, he said. I've got one of my own already, and she's about as much as I can. I'm not asking you to run a house for children, Josie said. I'm asking for a bed out of the cold for one night. 2 if the weather's what it looks like. She took a breath, and when she spoke again her voice had steadied, like she'd found the exact ground she meant to stand on. Give us 30 days, Mr. Sutton. That's all I'm asking. 30 days for you to see whether this can work, same as you'd have given any woman, who answered honestly. If at the end of it you want us gone, I'll put us on the train myself, and you won't hear another word out of me. He looked at her a long moment. He looked past her, at the boy, who had crouched down on the platform to look at something in a crack between the boards, a beetle, maybe, or a bit of frost-catching light, with the kind of total, unguarded attention that Della hadn't shown the world in 2 years. And he looked at the sky. 30 days, he said. Slow. Testing the shape of the number in his own mouth, before he committed to it. Starting tomorrow, since today's mostly weather already. 30 days, Josie agreed. Storm's coming in, he said, which was not agreement to anything beyond the number, exactly. Which was a man handing part of the decision to the weather, because he didn't trust himself to make all of it honestly on his own. I notice, Josie said. Wagons this way. Della did not say a word for the first 10 minutes of the ride. She sat between her father and the stranger woman on the bench seat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap the way her mother used to sit in church, and she watched the boy, Gideon. He'd said his name was Gideon, though the woman called him Gid, which Della found she did not entirely trust, because names people shortened were names people were trying to make smaller and friendlier than they really were. The boy sat in the wagon bed behind them, wrapped in a blanket her father had thrown back to him, without being asked, and he was talking. Not to anyone in particular. Just talking, the way small children did, narrating the world, as it went by. There's a bird. There's another bird. That one's got a torn wing, I think. No, it's just sitting funny. Is that a cow? Mama, is that a cow? It's a cow, Gid. There's a lot of nothing out here. Della almost smiled at that. Almost. She caught it, before it happened, and put her face back to careful. Because she had learned, in the 2 years since her mother died, exactly what happened when you let yourself like someone too fast. You got used to the sound of their voice in the kitchen. You got used to somebody humming while they swept. And then one morning there was a trunk by the door again, and a wagon waiting, and you were standing on the porch alone, wondering what you'd done, even though her father always told her, always, every single time, that it wasn't anything she'd done. 3 women. 3 trunks by the door. She had stopped believing. It isn't you. A long time ago, because it kept happening to the same you, over and over. So she was not going to like this one. She had decided that back at the station, the moment she saw the boy, and understood, faster than her father seemed to, that this changed everything. A woman alone might stay. A woman with a child of her own, a child who would always come first for her the way Della always came first for her father. That woman was borrowing this house. Not building a life in it. Della intended to remember that. She kept a private list in her head of things worth remembering, the way other people kept lists of chores, and she added this to it now, near the top. "You're quiet," Josie said. Not looking at her directly. Looking mostly at the road, which Della appreciated, because being looked at straight on always felt like being asked a question she hadn't agreed to answer. "I'm always quiet," Della said. "Good," Josie said. "Then we'll get along fine. I talk plenty for 2. Della did not answer that. But she added it to the list anyway. The land opened up the way it always did west of the depot, flattening out into that particular Kansas nothing that swallowed a person whole, if they weren't careful. Pale grass laid sideways by wind, fence line running toward a horizon that kept retreating no matter how far the wagon went. Josie had grown up in Missouri, where the hills at least gave the sky something to argue with. This was different. This sky said you are very small, and it said it, without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. She held her coat tighter. Behind her, Gid had gone quiet, finally, tucked down into the blanket, worn out from the train, and the cold, and the strangeness of everything. Beside her, the girl sat like a small closed door. Wyatt drove without speaking for the better part of 40 minutes. Then, without turning his head, "You said in your letters you knew stock. My father kept a small flock in Missouri. I helped from the time I could walk a fence line, without falling off it. Sheep specifically. Sheep specifically." A pause. The wagon wheels found a rut, jolted, settled. "How many head can you tell me you've handled at once?" Because that was how he tested things, she was learning already. Not with kindness. With numbers. 40 at peak, Josie said. Not 200. "I'm not going to pretend to you I've run an operation your size before, Mr. Sutton. I haven't. But I know a healthy ewe, from a sick one at 30 feet, and I know when a lamb's presenting wrong, and I know enough to be useful instead of underfoot. That's what I've got to offer. It's not nothing." He didn't answer right away. She watched his jaw work, the way a man's jaw works, when he's deciding whether to believe something, or simply let it lie there unchallenged for now. "We'll see," he said finally, which was, she was coming to understand, the closest thing this man had to encouragement. The ranch came into view the way disappointments usually did, slow, and then all at once. The house was square and sturdy-boned, but the paint had given up on itself years ago, and the porch sagged hard on the left side like a man favoring an old injury. Behind it, the barn stood taller and better kept, which told her plainly enough where this man's attention had gone in the years since his wife died, and where it had not. A well with a rope pulley wired together at the joint. A kitchen garden gone to frozen stalks. And beyond it all, in the far pasture, pale shapes moving slow against dun grass, the flock, heavy with wool, and the beginnings of lambs not due for another 6 weeks, indifferent to the cold in the specific patient way of animals that have no choice but to endure it. "It needs work," Wyatt said. He said it looking at the house instead of at her, the way a man admits a hard truth to a wall, so he doesn't have to watch it land on someone's face. Most things worth having do, Josie said. He glanced at her sideways. His mouth moved, not quite a smile, not quite anything she could name yet. He climbed down, and went to the wagon bed to lift Gideon out, who had fallen fully asleep somewhere in the last mile, and Josie watched him do it. Watched the careful, almost reluctant way he handled a stranger's child, like a man handling something breakable, that he had not agreed to be responsible for. He set the boy down gentle on his feet. Gid blinked awake, confused, looked up at this tall unfamiliar man standing over him in the cold. "We there?" Gid asked. "You're there," Wyatt said. Short. Not unkind. Just a man who did not yet know what softness this particular stranger's boy was owed. Della had already slipped off the wagon and gone to the porch, one hand on the door, not opening it, watching the three of them the way a cat watches a room, before deciding whether to enter it. "I'll show the inside," she said. To the air, mostly. Not quite to Josie. Not quite to Gid either. "We'd appreciate that," Josie said. The inside of the house was cleaner than the outside had led her to expect, and then, looking closer, she revised that. Not clean. Kept. There was a difference, and it was the difference between a household, with a woman's attention in it, and one that was simply not allowed to fall apart. Dishes washed. Floor swept. Nothing left to rot. And under all of it, a thin skin of dust on every surface that wasn't touched daily, the parlor mantel, the good chairs nobody sat in, a fireplace that clearly hadn't held a fire in longer than the ash on the grate suggested was reasonable. No curtains. One rug worn thin in the walking paths. A kitchen table, with 3 mismatched chairs, and Josie noted the count, without saying it out loud, 3 chairs for a house that would now, tonight, need to seat 5. Della led them room to room, with the thoroughness of a girl who had rehearsed this in her head more than once. Her own room had a row of smooth stones lined up on the windowsill, a child's sketch of a horse pinned crooked to the wall, a quilt in a pattern that looked old enough to have come down from a grandmother. Josie didn't comment on any of it. Some things you notice, and hold quiet, because noticing them out loud can feel like trespassing. The room they were given, hers and Gid's together, one narrow bed, and a cot Wyatt dragged in, without a word, was off the back hallway. Small. One window looking out on the barn. A cracked mirror over a chest of drawers. "Papa said you could change things if you needed to," Della said, standing in the doorway, with her arms stiff at her sides. "I probably won't change much," Josie said. "Not yet. I'd rather learn what's here first." Della studied her for a long beat. The kind of look a much older person gives, weighing something. "Mrs. Ashwell rearranged the whole kitchen on her second day," she said. "Papa didn't like it. She left after 6 weeks." Josie set her bag down slowly on the bed. "How many have there been?" she asked. Careful. Not pushing. 3, Della said. "You're the 4th. She said it the way you'd report weather. No cruelty in it. Just information, delivered flat, the way a child delivers the truths that adults spend their whole lives learning to soften." "Well," Josie said, "I don't have anywhere better to be. So I expect I'll outlast 6 weeks. Della didn't answer that. But she didn't leave the doorway right away either. She stood there a second longer, hand on the frame, like there was something else sitting behind her teeth. Then she turned and went back down the hall, without saying it. Dinner was venison stew Wyatt had left simmering that morning, and bread Della had made herself, cut into precise even pieces, before anyone was allowed to touch it, which told Josie more about this household's discipline than any conversation could have. Gid ate like a boy who had spent 3 days on a train living out of a basket. Fast. Both elbows on the table, until Josie caught his eye, and he pulled them off, sheepish, the way he always was, when he remembered manners half a beat too late. The wind outside had teeth in it now. It found the gap around the front door, and moved the lamp flame every few minutes, a small restless flicker that made shadows crawl up the walls and settle again. Nobody talked much. Della ate with her back straight and her eyes down. Wyatt ate the way a man eats, when his mind is somewhere else entirely. Josie could see it, the particular stillness of him, like a fence post standing in weather. She understood. She had shown up on his doorstep, with a secret folded into every sentence she'd written him, and now he was sitting at his own table wondering, probably, what else she hadn't said. She decided to give him something true, unprompted. Small. A down payment on trust. "I know it's a lot," she said. "Quiet. Showing up the way we did. If you want to end the 30 days early, I'd understand it." Wyatt looked up at her. His mouth flattened, not quite a frown, something closer to tired. 30 days is 30 days, he said. "Storm's not clearing for 3 at least. Nobody's going anywhere before then regardless. Not you. Not us." Which was not the same as welcome. But it was not the door either, and Josie found she could breathe a little easier around that. Gid, who had been quiet exactly as long as a 6-year-old's attention allowed, looked up from his stew. "Do you have a horse?" he asked Wyatt. 4, Wyatt said. "Can I ride one?" "Not tonight." "Tomorrow?" "Gid," Josie said, low, a warning. But Wyatt, and this surprised her, though she didn't let it show on her face, nearly smiled. Not quite. The corner of his mouth twitched and settled back before it committed to anything. "We'll see," he said, which she was already learning was the largest promise this man made to strangers. Della watched the exchange, with narrowed eyes, and said nothing at all, but Josie noticed her noticing, and added that, too, to the quiet count she was keeping of this house. Later, after the dishes were done, and Gid had fallen asleep, so fast and so completely that Josie had simply lifted him into the cot, without him stirring, she found herself alone at the kitchen table, with a single lamp, and the wind working at the eaves outside. She did not have a journal the way she once had. She had lost that habit the year Daniel died, the way she had lost a great many small habits that felt too fragile to keep carrying. But she still thought in that shape sometimes, the shape of writing something down to make it real, to hold it still long enough to look at. So she sat, and she let herself think it the way she would have written it. The ranch is worse than the letters let on. Not dishonestly worse. I think he described it the way it looks, when things are going well, not the way it is now. There's a difference between a place that's struggling, and a place that's given up. This is the first kind. I think. I hope. The girl is careful. Watching everything. She's not unkind, she's just been left too many times to trust easily, and I understand that better than she knows, because I've been left too, just in a different shape. He doesn't talk much. I don't know yet if that's grief, or the kind of man he was before grief, or just this land teaching him silence the way it teaches everything out here to go quiet and endure. She stopped there. Because there was a thought behind that one, waiting, and she did not let herself finish it. Not the thought about Cyrus. Not the thought about the letter still folded at the bottom of her trunk, the one with her real name on it, the one she had told herself she would burn 100 miles back, and had not been able to make herself do. Not tonight. Tonight she had a roof, and a storm outside instead of a man, with a courthouse order in his coat pocket, and a boy sleeping soundly for the first time in 3 days. That was enough to hold on to. For tonight, that was going to have to be enough. She banked what little fire there was, took the lamp, and went to bed beside her son, and outside the wind kept working at a house that did not yet know how much was about to change inside it. Morning came early, and cold, the way it always did out here, she would learn, colder than the night, before it in some unfair reversal of how weather was supposed to work. She woke before Gid, dressed in the near dark, with her breath showing in front of her, and she was moving toward the barn, before the sky had finished deciding whether it wanted to be gray, or something worse. Wyatt was already there. She saw the barn light through the gaps in the planking before she reached the door, and when she pulled it open, the warm smell of sheep and hay and lanolin hit her like a hand against the chest, a smell her body remembered before her mind caught up to it, some deep animal familiarity left over from childhood. He was moving down the row of pens, with a bucket of grain, checking each shoe the way a man checks a list he's run 100 times before. He looked up when she came in. Didn't seem surprised. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Slept fine," she said, which was mostly true. "Habit. I wake early." She went to the nearest rail and looked in. A ewe turned toward her, with that slow, curious appraisal sheep gave strangers. One ear ticked forward, belly heavy with lamb not yet due. "She's close," Josie said. "6 weeks out, maybe less if this cold keeps up." He moved on. Then, without quite turning, "You said 40 head? Missouri." "I did." "You know what to look for in a ewe that's off." It wasn't quite a question. She answered it like one anyway. Eyes. Ears. How she stands. Whether she comes to the rail, or turns away from it. She nodded toward the far pen, where one smaller animal stood apart from the others, head low, breathing a little quicker than Josie liked. That one, for instance. Wyatt followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. "Yearling," he said. "Been off since last night. I was going to check her again after chores." "I'd check her now," Josie said. "Careful. Not pushing past where she'd earned the right to push yet. If it's what I think it might be starting to be, the first day matters more than the rest put together." He looked at her a long moment. The kind of look a man gives when he's deciding, in real time, how much weight to put on a stranger's word. Then he set down the grain bucket and went to fetch the thermometer, without being asked twice, and Josie understood, watching him do it, that something in this house had just shifted half an inch. Not trust yet, not anything so large as trust, but the first small crack, where trust might someday get in. They worked her together that morning, a mild case, as it turned out, a warm drench, and a day's careful watching enough to bring the yearling back from the edge, before it ever became a true crisis. Small mercy. Josie took it, as a good sign anyway, the way a person takes any small mercy, as a good sign, when they need one badly enough. The days that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them named out loud, but both of them settled into anyway, the way water settles into whatever shape the ground gives it. Josie learned the kitchen's geography, where things were kept, what was running low, which corner of the stove ran hot, and which ran cold. She did not try to take it over. It was too soon for that, and she had learned, the hard way, what it cost the household, when a new woman came in, and started rearranging things that belonged to grief, as much as to habit. Della watched her do all of this, with narrow, careful eyes cataloging everything, saying almost nothing. Gid, meanwhile, attached himself to the ranch the way small boys attach themselves to anything new, and enormous and full of animals, completely, immediately, without a shred of the caution his mother was carrying for both of them. He followed Wyatt to the barn every chance he got. He asked 11 questions for every one Wyatt answered, and somewhere around the third day, Josie noticed something she hadn't expected to notice this soon. Wyatt was answering more of them. Not warmly, exactly. Not yet. But he was answering. "That one's called Biscuit," Gid reported at dinner on the 4th night, proud as if he'd built the animal himself. "She's got a torn ear, Della told me." Della, across the table, did not look up from her plate, but Josie saw the corner of her mouth twitch, the smallest, most reluctant almost smile, before the girl remembered herself, and put her face back to careful. Small things. Josie kept count of them the way another woman might have counted coins, because for now, in this house, small things were the only currency she had. On the 6th day, the weather broke enough for a trip into town, and Wyatt took her along to introduce her to the merchants, whose goodwill a household like his depended on. Larkspur was not a large town. A depot, a feed store, a dry goods store, a church with a bell, that had gone slightly out of tune, a scattering of houses along two crossing streets. And every person in every doorway watched Josie Reed walk past, with the same particular expression, not hostile, exactly. Careful. The closed, watchful reserve of a community that had already seen 3 women come through this arrangement and leave, and had made up its mind, quietly and collectively, that a 4th was probably not worth the trouble of hoping for. At the feed store, a broad, deliberate man named Otis Cooperton looked her over the way he might size up a horse he wasn't sure he trusted. "You're the new one," he said. Not a question. "I'm the new one," Josie agreed. He grunted. Went back to his ledger. That was the whole conversation, and somehow it told her exactly where she stood with this town, which was nowhere yet, and would have to be earned, the same slow way everything else here was going to have to be earned. At the dry goods store, a tall woman named Ruth Ferris measured her, with a glance that was almost, but not quite, friendly, and said only, "Good luck to you," in a tone that could have meant several different things at once. She didn't blame any of them. She was a stranger, who had arrived, with a boy nobody expected, married by arrangement to a man they'd known for years, and the only data this town had on her, so far, was that 3 women before her had lasted, combined, barely 4 months. She would have reserved judgment too, in their place. What she would not do was perform for them. She was not going to smile wider than she felt, or move through Larkspur, with the bright, eager face of someone trying to win a popularity contest she hadn't entered. She did her business. She was civil. She let them draw their own conclusions in their own time, because in her experience a reputation built on performance never held, and a reputation built on evidence eventually did. The evidence, she reminded herself, was still accumulating. She could be patient. She had gotten very good at patient this past year. It was on the 10th night, 4 days shy of 30, that everything nearly came apart. Josie had gone out to the barn, after supper, to check the yearling one last time, the one she'd flagged, that first morning, the one that had come back fully now, eating, ears up, no trace left of that first dull look in her eyes. She was gone perhaps 20 minutes. Long enough. When she came back, into the house, cold clinging to her coat, she found Della standing very still in the middle of the front room, holding a folded paper in both hands like it might bite her. Josie's whole body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "Della. Careful. Even. Where did you get that?" "It fell out." The girl's voice was flat, but her eyes were not flat at all. They were wide, and working hard, the way a child's eyes work when they've stumbled onto something they don't fully understand, but understand enough to know it's important. "Out of your trunk. When I was moving it, like Papa said to, so it wasn't in the doorway. Give it here." But Della didn't move. She looked down at the paper again, and then back up, and her chin came up in a small stubborn tilt that Josie was already starting to recognize as purely, entirely Della. "It says Marsh," Della said. "Not Reed. It says Josephine Marsh." The words hit the room like a dropped plate. Josie heard the front door open behind her, before she could answer. Wyatt, coming in from the last check of the night, stamping snow off his boots, stopping cold in the doorway, when he saw his daughter's face, and the paper in her hands, and the look on Josie's. "What's going on?" he said. Not a question. A demand dressed up as one. Della held the paper out to him, without a word. He unfolded it slowly. Josie watched his eyes move down the page. A legal notice, a caseworker's letterhead, a name written out formal, and cold in a clerk's careful hand. Josephine Marsh. Guardian of Gideon Marsh. He looked up at her. "You told me your name was Reed," he said. "It is my name," Josie said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was, she thought distantly, the one skill this year had given her, that she was actually grateful for. "It's the name I was born with. Marsh is—" She stopped herself. The way she kept stopping herself. Except this time there was nowhere left to hide the rest of the sentence, not with his eyes on her like that, not with Della standing between them holding proof that the woman in this house had not been entirely honest about who she was. "Marsh is my husband's name," she said finally. "My late husband's name. And his family is not. They're not people I can afford to be found by right now. That's why I signed the letters the way I did. That's the truth of it. All of it this time." The room went very quiet. Outside, the wind had died down for once, an unfair, almost mocking calm, like the weather itself had decided to sit back and watch what happened next. "Found by," Wyatt repeated. Slow, weighing each word like he was checking it for a hidden second meaning. "Found by for what?" "For my son," Josie said, and her voice cracked on the word son in a way she hadn't let it crack in front of anyone in 10 months, not once, not even at the funeral. "That's all I'll say tonight. I know that's not enough. I know you have every right to end the 30 days right now, and put us on the next train, and never think of us again. But I'm asking you, not for me. For him." She nodded toward the back hallway, where Gid slept on, blessedly unaware that his whole world was being decided 20 feet away. "Let the 30 days stand. That's all I came here asking for in the first place." Wyatt looked down at the paper again. Then at her. Then, for a long, unreadable moment, at his own daughter, who was watching both of them, with the particular stillness of a child trying very hard to understand something too big for the room she was standing in. "Della," he said finally, gentle in a way Josie hadn't heard from him yet. "Go on to bed." "But—" "Go on." Della went, though she looked back once, from the hallway, at Josie, with an expression that wasn't quite trust, and wasn't quite its opposite either, something suspended between the two, waiting to see which way it would fall. When she was gone, Wyatt folded the paper again, slow, deliberate, and set it down on the table between them like a man setting down a weapon he didn't want to be holding anymore. "I've had a belly full of women in this house telling me half of things," he said. Quiet. Rough at the edges. "I don't know if I've got room left in me for a whole lie on top of it." "It wasn't a lie," Josie said. "It was a name I was born with, used honestly, on a letter I meant every other word of." "That's a fine distinction to be making at 11 o'clock at night." "It's the only one I've got." He was quiet a long time. Long enough that she thought, with a strange, cold calm, that this might simply be over, that she would be packing the trunk again by morning, back on a train east, with nowhere better to go than the place she'd already run from once. But when he finally spoke, it wasn't the word she'd braced for. "You've got the 30 days like we agreed," he said. 4 of them gone, 26 left. "I don't go back on a number once I've given it." He looked at her, and for just a moment the careful wall he'd kept up, since the platform wasn't quite all the way closed. "But I'll be watching closer than I was before. And if there's more in that trunk I ought to know about." "There isn't," Josie said. "There's just a boy, who needs somewhere safe, and a mother, who ran out of easy ways to give him that." Wyatt held her eyes a moment longer. "All right," he said finally. It was not forgiveness. It was not even yet trust. But it was the door staying open one more night, and Josephine Reed, Josephine Marsh, a name she hadn't said out loud in weeks, and would have to learn to live inside of again, at least in this house, at least with this man, found that for tonight, that would have to be enough to build on. She banked the fire. She went to the room, where her son slept, sound and unknowing, and she stood a long moment in the doorway just watching him breathe, the way she had every night, since the well collapsed, and the ground under both their lives gave way. Outside, the wind picked back up, working at the eaves the way it worked at everything out here, patient, relentless, indifferent to whether the thing it wore at broke or held. She did not know yet which this house was going to do. But she had 4 days behind her, and 26 ahead of her, and a boy asleep in a cot, who did not yet understand how close tonight had come to ending everything. She intended to make every one of those 26 days count. 26 days is not a long time. Except when you're counting them. Except when every single one has a number attached to it in your head, ticking down like a clock nailed to the inside of your ribs. Josie had stopped saying the number out loud by the 4th day. She hadn't stopped counting. Because that was the thing about borrowed time. You could tell yourself you weren't watching it run out. You could keep your hands busy, and your voice even, and your face arranged into something steady. But the counting happened anyway. Underneath. Like a second heartbeat nobody else could hear. So she worked. She worked the way her grandfather had taught her to work, not loud about it, not performing it for anyone watching, from a porch or a doorway, just steady, unglamorous, morning to dark work that asked nothing of anyone, and proved something to everyone. The mornings started the same now. Dark. Cold enough to see her own breath inside the house, before the stove caught. She'd dress with her hands half numb, and be out the door, before the sky had made up its mind what color it wanted to be, and by the time Wyatt reached the barn she'd already have the lamp lit, and the first 2 pens checked. He never said good morning. He just glanced at what she'd already done, and something in his shoulders would ease down half an inch, and that was the whole conversation. That was enough. Until it wasn't. Until the day the wind died down enough for real work to begin, and the whole shape of the next 4 weeks announced itself all at once, the way weather does out here, not gradually. All at once. It was a smaller you, nameless still, who nearly ended everything, before the 26 days had even finished their first week. Josie found her on the 11th morning, down in the corner of a pen that should have held a healthy yearling, and instead held something folded in on itself, breathing too fast, eyes gone dull at the edges the way eyes go dull, when an animal has stopped fighting, and started waiting. She didn't call for Wyatt first. She went in, knelt in the frozen straw, ran her hands along the ew's sides, pressed careful fingers into the belly, checked the gums, pale. Too pale. Her heart had already started climbing, before her mind caught up, and told it to. Wyatt. Not loud. Just enough to carry down the row of pens. Wyatt, I need you. He came fast. Faster than she expected. Which told her something about him too, that under the flat voice, and the careful distance, there was a man, who moved like his whole body already knew what mattered, before his mind gave the order. He crouched beside her. Looked. His jaw went tight. How long? He said. I don't know. Could be since last night. Josie kept her hands moving steady, checking what needed checking. Her breathing's wrong. Fast. Shallow. Gums are pale, which means... I know what it means. Then you know we don't have long to decide what we're doing about it. He was quiet a second. Weighing her the way he weighed everything, slow, careful, like trust was a fence post he wasn't ready to lean his whole weight against yet. What do you need? He said finally. And there it was. Not agreement exactly. Something better than agreement. A door, cracked open half an inch. Warm water. Molasses. Whatever Epsom salt you've got on that shelf. She didn't look up from the U while she said it. And I need you to trust me for the next hour, without asking me to explain every step of it. Another beat. Longer this time. All right, he said. He went for the thermometer, without being told twice. They worked through the morning together, the two of them, wordless except for what the work required. He held. She measured. She drenched the ewe with warm water and molasses and a careful hand, and the animal fought it, most of it, which was, strangely, a good sign. An animal too far gone doesn't fight anything anymore. Della came to the barn door around mid-morning, drawn by the quiet the way children are always drawn to quiet that doesn't feel right. She stood in the doorway a long moment, watching. Arms folded the exact same way her father folded his, though Josie doubted either of them knew they did it. Is she going to die? Della asked. Flat. The way she asked everything, like she'd already braced for the worst answer, and just needed it confirmed, so she could stop bracing. I don't know yet, Josie said. Honest. She'd decided a long time ago, with her own son, in a kitchen that had gone terribly quiet the day the news came about Daniel, that children deserved true answers, over soft ones. Soft answers didn't protect them. Soft answers just delayed the moment they learned the world lied to them too. She's fighting. We're helping her fight. That's all any of us can do right now. Della was quiet a moment. Then, without quite meaning to, without quite deciding to, she stepped further, into the barn. What's her name? She asked. I don't know if she has one. Della looked at the ewe a long moment. At the torn edge of one ear, at the way she pressed her nose weakly toward the rail whenever someone got close. Willow, Della said. She used to stand under the willow tree by the south fence in summer. I used to watch her from the porch. Willow, then, Josie said. And something passed between them, small, wordless, nothing either of them would have called a beginning, if you'd asked them. But it was one. Josie could feel the shape of it even, if Della didn't have a name for it yet. Willow lived. It took 3 days of careful watching, warm mash, and Josie sitting up 2 of those nights on an overturned bucket, with a lamp burning low, and her hands going numb, from the cold, that no amount of blanket seemed to fully argue with. But on the 3rd morning, Willow was on her feet. Eating. Ears up, eyes clear, the particular alertness of an animal that has decided, somewhere in its small stubborn body, that living was worth the trouble after all. Wyatt found Josie there, that 3rd morning, asleep sitting up against the post, chin dropped to her chest, the lamp burned down to almost nothing. He didn't wake her right away. He stood there a moment, she learned this later, from Della, who'd been standing right behind him, and had watched her father's whole face go soft in a way she didn't have a word for yet but kept anyway, tucked in beside everything else she was starting to notice about how her father looked at this woman now. When Josie finally woke, stiff-necked, disoriented, Wyatt was crouched by the pen, with his hand on Willow's side. She made it, he said. Rough. Quiet. She made it, Josie agreed. He looked at her then. Really looked, the way he hadn't quite let himself, since the platform, since the letter, since Della's small hand holding out a paper, with the wrong name written on it. You didn't have to sit up 2 nights for a yearling, that wasn't even bred yet, he said. I know, Josie said. Why'd you do it then? She thought about that. Thought about the truest answer instead of the easiest one. Because my grandfather used to say a shepherd, who gives up early on a sick animal has already decided what that animal's worth. She said. He didn't believe in giving up early. On anything. His mouth moved, considering something, and settled back, into its usual careful line, before it committed to anything more. Thank you, he said. He said it like a man, who didn't say it often. Rusty. A little awkward in his mouth, like the word itself had gone stiff from disuse. Josie found, standing there in the cold barn light, with her whole body aching, from 2 sleepless nights, that it was worth more to her than she wanted to admit. The days that followed had a different weight to them. Not easier. Nothing out here was ever easier, exactly. Lambing season was closing in fast now, and the work didn't lighten, and there was a stretch of hard sleet in the 2nd week, that kept everyone indoors more than anyone wanted, and found 2 new leaks in the roof nobody had known were coming. But something in the household had shifted. Something small, and quiet, and not yet named by anyone out loud. It attached himself to Wyatt the way small boys attach themselves to men, who let them follow, completely, without hesitation, without any of the careful weighing his mother carried around like a second coat. He asked questions constantly. About the sheep. About the fence line. About why the barn smelled the way it did, and whether wolves came this close to the house, and whether he could someday have a horse of his own. Wyatt answered more of these than Josie expected. Short answers. Flat, unadorned answers. But answers. Do sheep get cold at night? They've got wool. But do they get cold? Less than we do. Could I sleep out here with them sometime? To find out for sure? No. Why not? Because your mother would have my head. Which was, Josie thought, listening from the porch, with a basket of laundry balanced on her hip, the closest thing to a joke she'd heard out of this man, since she'd arrived. She kept that one too, tucked in with the rest, a private store of small goods signs she'd started building the way other people built savings. Della, for her part, resisted longer. Della had built her caution the hard way, out of 3 departures, and one grave her mother's name was carved into, and caution like that didn't dissolve just because a woman sat up 2 nights with a sick yearling. But even Della's guard had begun, almost against its own will, to slip half an inch at a time. It happened first over the sketchbook. Josie found her one gray afternoon at the kitchen table, hunched over a page, chalk-smudged fingers, the particular fierce concentration of a child working on something she cared about more than she'd ever admit. "May I see?" Josie asked. Careful. Not assuming the answer. Della hesitated. Then, slowly, turned the page around. It was Willow. Not a perfect drawing. The proportions were off the way children's drawings were always off, legs too short, head too large, but there was something true in it. Something observed. The torn ear was there, exact. The particular tilt of the head, when Willow leaned toward the rail. "That's very good," Josie said. She meant it, and something in her voice must have carried the meaning clean through, because Della's whole posture eased, just slightly, just for a second. "I'm going to draw the whole flock someday," Della said. "Every one. So I remember them. That's a fine thing to want to do." Della looked up at her. There was a question sitting behind her eyes, unasked, and Josie could see the exact shape of it, the same question that had been sitting behind Della's eyes since the platform, since the trunk, since the name on the paper that didn't match the name on the letters. "Are you going to stay long enough to see it finished?" Della asked. Josie's chest tightened. Because that was the question, wasn't it? That was always the question, underneath every other question in this house. Not are you kind, not are you good, with animals, not do you know how to run a kitchen. Just, are you going to stay? "I intend to," Josie said. Careful. Honest, as far as honest could reach right now. "I can't promise you the world hasn't got other plans. Nobody can promise that. But I intend to." Della held her eyes a long moment, then went back to her drawing, and said nothing more, but her shoulders had eased down too, the same half-inch her father's had eased down in the barn. Small things. Josie was learning that this house ran on small things. That trust here wasn't handed over in one grand gesture. It was earned in inches, in mornings, in 100 small proofs stacked one on top of the other, until eventually they held weight. The ledger, when she found it, was almost an accident. She'd gone looking for the household accounts, wanting to understand the shape of the ranch's finances the way she understood the shape of everything else here now, methodically, without assuming she already knew what she was looking at. Wyatt had told her roughly what she already suspected, from the state of the porch, and the thin coat Della wore, and the careful way every purchase in town got weighed before it was made. Tight. Very tight. The wool money came once a year, and it stretched exactly, as far as it could, and never quite that much further. She found the ledger in the back of the parlor desk, behind a folded bill of sale, and a bundle of old correspondence tied with string. Plain, green-covered, spine cracked from years of handling, pages warped from what looked like an old spill. She opened it at the kitchen table one afternoon, while Gid was in the yard, with Della. The two of them had taken, in the last week, to a strange wordless game involving sticks, and an imaginary fort, something that made her chest ache, with a gladness she hadn't let herself feel in a long time, and Wyatt was out checking fence. She turned the pages slowly. The records went back years. Before his wife died, and after. And the difference showed itself plain on the page. 2 hands in the early years, one small and careful, one larger and less steady, and after a certain point, only the larger hand remained. Tired. Doing one more task at the end of one more long day alone. She was looking for the wool revenue column, when the numbers started to bother her. Because they were wrong. Not wrong the way arithmetic goes wrong, no smudged figures, no crossed-out mistakes. Wrong the way a story goes wrong, when someone's been telling you only half of it for years, and you finally notice the shape of the missing part. Too low. Consistently. Year after year, too low. She knew roughly what Rambouillet fleece should bring at market. Her grandfather had run merino, a different breed, but close enough in principle, and she'd absorbed the arithmetic of wool the way she'd absorbed everything, from him, half by instruction, and half by simply listening, while he talked. Clean, well-skirted, good staple length, that commanded a price. And the price this ledger recorded, year after year, was nowhere close to it. Not even allowing for a bad season. Not even allowing for every honest cost a trader might claim. She went through the ledger twice. Then a third time, because she wanted to be sure, before she let herself believe what the numbers were telling her. By the time Wyatt came in for supper, she'd done the math 3 times over, and each time it came out the same. She waited. Waited until Gid and Della had eaten, and gone off to whatever quiet game had claimed their afternoon. Waited until the kitchen had gone still, and the lamp was the only sound in the room besides the wind. Then she set the ledger on the table between them. "I found the accounts," she said. Wyatt looked at the book. Cautious. Not defensive yet, just a man bracing for a thing he didn't yet know the shape of. "I keep them in the desk," he said. "I know. I was looking for the household figures." She sat across from him. "Who buys your wool?" "Silas Crane. Comes through the county twice a year, spring and fall. Been trading with ranchers here longer than I've been alive, near enough." "Does he buy from most of the operations around here?" "Most of them, yes." Josie opened the ledger to the revenue column. Turned it to face him. "Your wool is worth more than this," she said. "Significantly more. Your fleece records show good weight, clean clips, consistent quality. Rambouillet cross like yours should bring somewhere between 20 and 25 cents a pound this season. You've been getting 12. 13 at best." Wyatt looked at the numbers a long moment. His jaw had gone tight the way it did. "Market varies," he said. "It varies some," Josie said. "Even." Not accusing, she'd decided, before she ever opened her mouth, that anger wouldn't be useful here, that this needed to land, as fact, not feeling. It doesn't vary 9 cents a pound, every single year, in the exact same direction. That's not a market moving. That's someone deciding how much you're allowed to know. The kitchen went very quiet. "Silas Crane," Wyatt said, slow, like he was testing the shape of the accusation against a man he'd known his whole life, "has been doing business with this family since before I married." He extended credit to Cora's father one bad winter, when nobody else in the county would have. "I know that's what you believe. It's what happened. It might both be true," Josie said. "That he did a kind thing once. And that he's been taking more than his share every year since, counting on nobody ever sitting down and doing the arithmetic." Wyatt was quiet a long time, looking at the numbers. Looking at nothing. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "That's fair," Josie said. He closed the ledger. He didn't hand it back to her, which she understood, correctly, she'd learn later, as a sign he intended to go through it himself, line by line, the way a man checks a wound he's just been told might be worse than it looked. He thought about it for 2 days. 2 days where he moved through the ranch quieter than usual, which was saying something for a man whose default was already so quiet it bordered on silence, and with a particular set to his shoulders that Josie was learning to read now, the look of a man working through something he badly didn't want to be working through, but couldn't put down either. Della noticed. Della noticed everything Josie was discovering, in the way of a child who had learned early that survival depended on reading the weather of the adults around her. "Papa's thinking about something bad," Della said on the second morning, appearing at Josie's elbow, while she rolled out biscuit dough. "He's thinking about something difficult," Josie said. "That's not quite the same thing," Della considered this. What's the difference? Bad is when you're running away from something, Josie said. Difficult is when you're walking toward it, even though it costs you something to go. She turned the dough. Della picked up a scrap that had fallen from the edge and ate it without asking, which was, Josie noted, the first purely childlike thing she'd seen the girl do in 10 days of careful watching. How do you know it's difficult and not bad? Della asked. Because he's still here, Josie said. After 2 hard years and a rough winter, he's still here. A man running from something doesn't stay. He stays. Della chewed, thinking. You're still here too. I suppose I am. On the evening of the second day, Wyatt came in from checking the flock and found Josie at the table, still working the numbers over in her own hand, cross-referencing against what she remembered of her grandfather's records. He stood at the end of the table a moment before she looked up. I wrote to a man I know outside Abilene, he said. Runs a bigger operation than mine. Asked him plain what he'd been getting per pound. He set a folded letter down on the table. 22 cents last fall, he said. Sold to a cooperative buyer. Not Crane. Josie looked at the letter. Then at him. You've been getting 13, she said. 13.5, he said. His voice had gone flat. Not flat like he didn't feel it. Flat like a man keeping the feeling in a box, because if he let it out right now, in this kitchen, in front of her, he didn't know what shape it would take. For 4 years, he said. The kitchen was very quiet. The stove ticked. Somewhere outside, a sheep called once, distant, and went still. I'm sorry, Josie said. Simple. She wasn't going to perform outrage on his behalf. This was his to feel, not hers to dramatize. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavy, both hands flat on the table, looking at them instead of at her. Cora trusted him, he said. Her father trusted him before that. I just kept using him, because that's how it had always been done. Because it never once occurred to me to check. That's not a foolish reason, Josie said. It's a human one. Trust what you already know. Don't look too hard at things that seem steady. Most people do exactly that. It just happens that it costs you more than most people ever find out. He looked up at her. When's he due back? She asked. Spring clip. 6 weeks out. Maybe 7. Then we've got 6 weeks. Josie said. To have your records straight, your weights and grades documented, and another buyer lined up, so you've got somewhere to walk to, if he won't deal fair when the time comes. Wyatt studied her. Something had opened in his face, a fraction wider than she'd seen it open before. You think he won't deal fair? I think a man who's been setting his own price for 4 years, without anyone checking him, isn't going to enjoy being checked, Josie said. But I could be wrong. I'd been wrong before. He was quiet a moment. Then low. I'm not good at this kind of thing. Confrontation. Bargaining. Cora was better at it than I am. She'd have handled this faster than I have. Josie thought about the right thing to say to that, and settled on the true one instead. You're handling it now, she said. That's what matters. He held her eyes. And for once, the wall didn't quite close all the way back up after. All right, he said. Where do we start? She turned to a fresh page of her own notebook. You start by telling me everything you know about how Crane grades your fleece. What he says. What he writes down. How he arrives at his numbers. She looked up at him. I'll tell you what I know about what those grades ought to actually be worth. He leaned forward and started talking, and this time the words came easier than they'd come before, like something held under pressure for years had finally found a small opening to escape through. The evening went long. The lamp burned low. Outside, the wind moved across the flat Kansas dark the way it always did, indifferent, patient, unbothered by what 2 people at a kitchen table were quietly building against a man who'd spent 4 years counting on nobody ever noticing. Josie went to bed that night with ink on her fingers, and a strange, unfamiliar feeling sitting in her chest. Not quite hope. She wasn't ready to call it hope yet. But something close enough to it, that she lay awake while just holding the shape of it, before she let herself sleep. The days after that had a different quality. Purposeful. She wrote letters, to the State Wool Growers Association for their most recent price tables, to 2 cooperative buyers, whose names she'd pulled from the agricultural papers at the Larkspur post office, asking plainly about terms and reach. The postmaster, a dry, careful man named Aldous Pruitt, looked at her correspondence, over his spectacles, with an expression that wasn't quite suspicion, but sat close enough to it. "Quite a bit of writing for a new bride," he said. "Business letters," Josie said, and didn't elaborate, and held his gaze until he stamped them. She was learning Larkspur's opinion of her the same slow way she was learning everything else here, by triangulation, by small encounters stitched together, into a shape. Watchful. Reserved. Not hostile, exactly. Just a town that had watched the Sutton place struggle for 2 years, and made up its mind, quietly, that it was probably past saving, and wasn't sure, yet what to do, with a woman who seemed to disagree. She let them watch. She did her business, stayed civil, didn't perform. A reputation built on performance never held. One built on evidence eventually did. Meanwhile, lambing season crept closer, with every cold morning, and the numbers she was assembling against Silas Crane grew thicker, more precise, harder to argue with. She did not yet know how close those 2 clocks, the lambing and the reckoning with Crane, were about to collide with a third one entirely. One she hadn't seen coming at all. It was the 14th night of the 26th that the fever came. Gid had seemed fine at supper. Tired, maybe, quieter than his usual chatter, but she chalked that up to a long day chasing Della around the barn, and hadn't thought twice about it, because that was the cruelty of it, wasn't it? The way these things never announced themselves in time to be stopped, only in time to be survived. She woke near midnight to the sound of him crying out in his sleep. Small, broken, wordless. She had her hand on his forehead, before she was even fully awake, and what she felt there stopped her heart cold in her chest. Burning. He was burning. "Gid!" She shook him gently. "Gid, baby, wake up." His eyes opened, glassy, unfocused, not quite finding her face. "Mama! It hurts." "Where? Where does it hurt?" "Everywhere." Which was the worst possible answer, because everywhere meant nowhere she could point to and fix. Everywhere meant something moving through him that she couldn't see, couldn't name, couldn't fight with her hands the way she'd fought for Willow in that cold barn pen. She was up. Moving. Cold water, a rag, her hands not quite steady, her mind already running, through every fever she'd ever nursed a child, through and every one that hadn't ended well, and she made herself stop that thought before it finished, because finishing it wouldn't help him, would only hollow her out at the exact moment he needed her whole. She wrapped him. Wet the cloth. Pressed it to his forehead, his neck, his wrists, the way her own mother had taught her a lifetime ago in a different kitchen, in a different life, that felt, right now, and possibly far away. He whimpered. Twisted. His skin was too hot under her hands, too hot in a way that scared her more than she let her voice show. "Wyatt!" she called out. Not loud. But it carried, the way her voice had carried the morning she found Willow down in the straw. "Wyatt, I need you." He was there fast. Faster than fast. He must have been half listening even in sleep, some part of him tuned to the sound of trouble the way a man who runs a ranch alone learns to be tuned to it. He took one look at Gid, one look at Josie's face, and didn't ask a single unnecessary question. "How long has he been like this?" "I don't know. He seemed fine at supper." "He's burning up, Wyatt. He's burning." Wyatt knelt beside the cot. Put the back of his hand to Gid's forehead the way a man checks livestock, quick and sure, and his jaw went tight in a way that told Josie everything, before he said a word. "That's high," he said. "I know it's high. Higher than a fever's got any business going, without something behind it. I know. He was already moving. Because that was who Wyatt Sutton was, she was learning, not a man of many words in a crisis, but a man of exact and useful motion. He had the water basin refreshed, before she'd finished wringing out the first cloth. He had the lamp trimmed brighter, throwing more light across the small, shaking shape of her son. Has he had anything like this before? Wyatt asked. Fevers that ran hot fast. Not this hot. Her voice cracked on the word, just slightly, and she hated it, hated that it slipped out, but there was no holding every seam closed at once, not tonight. He gets colds. Regular colds. This isn't that. Could be the same thing, that had Willow down, Wyatt said. Grim. Something moving through the house. It happens sometimes. Whatever's in the air out here doesn't much care whether it's got wool or skin. That's not comforting. Wasn't meant to be. Meant to be useful. He looked at her steady in a way that cut through the panic climbing her throat just enough for her to hear him properly. We're going to bring it down. That's the job right now. Everything else waits. The next 2 hours blurred together the way the worst hours always do, not vanishing, exactly, just compressing, folding in on themselves, until later, remembering it, she could only find pieces. The cloth, wrung and pressed and wrung again. Gid's small body twisting under her hands, too hot, too still, then too restless, back and forth between the two in a rhythm that terrified her more than either extreme alone could have. Della appeared in the doorway at some point, nightgown under her coat, hair loose, face gone pale in the lamplight. Is he going to die? She asked. Small. Not flat this time. Not careful. Just scared, the plain unguarded scared of a child, who had already lost one person she loved, and couldn't bear the arithmetic of losing another. I don't know, Josie said. Because she promised herself, promised this whole house, honest answers over soft ones. He's fighting. We're helping him fight. Della came further into the room. Sat on the edge of the cot, without being invited, without asking, and took Gid's small hand in both of hers. Willow fought too, Della said. To Gid mostly. Quiet, steady, the voice of a girl trying to be brave for someone smaller than her. She made it. You can too. Wyatt looked at his daughter a long moment. Something moved through him. Josie caught it even, through the fear clouding her own, love and grief tangled up together, too complicated to name. Then Gid's breath hitched. Caught. And for one terrible, silent second, nothing moved at all. Gid! Josie's voice broke fully this time. Gid, look at me! His eyes opened. Unfocused. Searching. And then, in the thin, small voice of a child, who doesn't know which grown person is, which anymore, doesn't know anything except that he is scared, and hurting and needs someone bigger than himself to fix it. Papa, Gid said. Papa, it hurts. The word landed in the room like something dropped, from a great height. Josie felt it hit her chest. Felt Wyatt go still beside her, completely still, the stillness of a man who has just been handed something he never asked for, and doesn't know, yet whether he's allowed to want it. Nobody corrected the boy. Nobody said anything at all for a long moment. Then Wyatt knelt down beside the cot, took Gid's other hand, the one Della wasn't already holding, and said low, rough, steadier than Josie had ever heard him say anything. I'm here. I'm right here. The fever broke somewhere near dawn. Slow. Uneven. The way it always does, less like a door swinging open, and more like a fist unclenching one finger at a time. Gid's breathing evened out first. Then the heat under Josie's palm began, finally, mercifully, to ease. By the time the sky outside the window had gone the pale gray pink of early morning, he was sleeping, real sleep, not the fevered thrashing kind, chest rising and falling slow and steady, Della's hand still loosely wrapped around his, where she'd fallen asleep sitting up against the cot frame, exhausted past caring about dignity. Wyatt sat back on his heels. Exhaled. A long, controlled breath through his nose, the kind of breath a man lets out when he's been holding something in far longer than his body wanted to. "He's through the worst of it," he said. "I think so," Josie said. Her own voice was hoarse, from hours of talking through it, murmuring nonsense and comfort in equal measure. "I think we got him through it." Wyatt looked at his daughter, asleep against the cot. Looked at Gid, breathing easy now for the first time in hours. Looked, finally, at Josie, hollow-eyed, exhausted, her hair come loose from its pins, hands still faintly trembling, from the hours of fear she hadn't had room to feel, until just now. "He called me Papa," Wyatt said. Quiet. Like he was testing whether the words still held their shape now that the crisis had passed. "I heard," Josie said. "I didn't correct him. I noticed that too." They looked at each other a long moment in the gray early light. Neither of them said anything else. There wasn't anything simple enough to say that wouldn't undersell what had just happened in this small cold room. A boy calling a stranger by a word that meant everything, and that stranger answering it instead of stepping back from it. Wyatt reached out. Not for her, for the blanket that had slipped half off Gid's shoulder, tucking it back, with a careful, clumsy gentleness that told her more than any speech could have. "Get some rest," he said finally. "I'll sit with him a while." "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "I want to." And Josie, too tired to argue, and too moved to try, let him. Something had changed after that night. Not loud. Not announced. But real, the way the first thaw is real, before anyone's decided to call it spring. Wyatt started answering Gid's questions, before Gid finished asking them, the particular shorthand of two people who've started to understand each other. Della stopped watching Josie, with quite the same careful distance. She still watched, she would probably always watch, that was simply who Della was now, forged in the fire of 3 departures. But something in the watching had softened. And Josie found, in the days that followed, that she and Wyatt had begun working the wool ledger and the Silas Crane problem together, with a fluency that hadn't been there 2 weeks before. Fewer explanations needed. Fewer careful, measured sentences to bridge the distance between them. He'd started, without either of them naming it, simply trusting what she told him. Which made what happened next, the third thing, the thing neither of them saw coming at all, land that much harder. The 26 days ran out, that week, quietly, without either of them marking the date out loud. Josie noticed it passed the way you notice a held breath finally let go. The number simply stopped mattering, buried under everything larger that was coming for them now. Nobody spoke of trains again. Nobody needed to. It was a Tuesday, gray and unremarkable, when Josie rode into Larkspur alone to post another round of letters to the cooperative buyers. She'd left Gid at the ranch under Della's fierce, self-appointed supervision. The two of them had become nearly inseparable, since the fever night, bound together the way children get bound, after a scare, and Josie had stopped worrying about leaving them alone together the way she'd worried about it 3 weeks ago. Aldous Pruitt took her letters at the post office window, with his usual dry economy of words. But as she turned to go, he said, almost as an afterthought, "Man came through yesterday asking, after the Sutton place." Josie's whole body went still. "What kind of man?" she asked. "Careful. Too careful," she heard it in her own voice, and couldn't stop it. "Stranger. Well dressed for these parts. Asked whether a woman and a boy had come through recently. Said he was looking for family." Pruitt shrugged, unbothered, a man who dealt in the small currency of gossip, without ever weighing what it might cost someone. "Told him I couldn't say. Wasn't my business to say." "Did he give a name?" "Marsh," Pruitt said. "Said his name was Marsh." The word hit her like cold water down the back of her collar. She rode back to the ranch faster than she'd ridden anything in months, her mind running through every worst possibility it could construct, arriving at none of them, and all of them at once. Cyrus. It could only be Cyrus. She found Wyatt at the barn, and the look on her face must have told him everything, before she opened her mouth, because he was already moving toward her, before she'd finished dismounting. "What happened?" "There's a man in Larkspur," Josie said, breathless, half from the ride, and half from something closer to panic. "Asking after a woman and a boy. Gave his name as Marsh." Wyatt's face went hard. "Your husband's brother. It has to be." She pressed her hand flat against her own chest, like she could hold her heart still, through sheer force of will. "I thought I had more time. I don't know how he'd have found this far, this fast, unless—" She stopped. Because a thought had just surfaced, cold and sudden, one she hadn't let herself consider, until this exact moment. Unless someone told him. "Wyatt." Her voice had gone very quiet. "Who all did you tell, that a new woman had come to stay here?" "Nobody outside this county," he said. "Cooperton. Ruth Ferris at the dry goods store. Aldous, obviously, since he handles the mail." He stopped. His jaw worked once, hard, and Josie could see the same cold realization she just had arriving on his own features half a second behind hers. "And Silas Crane. He came through 3 weeks back, before the storm cleared. Asked after the household same as anybody would. I mentioned it plain, same as I'd have mentioned anything." Josie felt the floor of her stomach drop out. "Crane travels the whole territory," she said, slow, putting it together out loud, as it assembled itself in her mind. "Every ranch, every trading post, every rail depot between here and 3 counties over. If he mentioned it to the wrong person, if he mentioned it to anyone connected to the Marsh family." "You think Crane sold that information?" Wyatt said. Flat. Not disbelieving, she could hear that he'd already arrived at the same ugly shape she had. "I think a man who's been quietly cheating this ranch for 4 years isn't above trading a piece of gossip for a favor, from someone with money and reach," Josie said. "Especially not if that someone happened to be looking for exactly the kind of information Crane would have had, without even trying." The two of them stood there a long moment in the cold, the full weight of it settling between them, not one threat, but two, tangled together in a way either of them had seen coming. The man who'd been stealing from Wyatt's wool for years. And the man who wanted to take Josie's son. Possibly now, the very same conversation. "He's not getting near that boy," Wyatt said. Low. Final. The voice of a man who had spent 2 weeks answering a 6-year-old's endless questions, and had, somewhere in the asking and the answering, stopped thinking of him as someone else's child to protect. "You don't have any legal claim to stop him," Josie said, quiet, because it was true, and because someone needed to say it out loud. "Not yet. Not the way things stand." "Then we change how things stand," Wyatt said. He looked at her, steady, in the gray afternoon light, and for the first time, since the platform, since the letter, since Della's small hand holding out proof that Josephine Reed and Josephine Marsh were the same frightened woman wearing 2 different names, Josie saw something in his face that wasn't caution, and wasn't distance, and wasn't careful measured distrust waiting to be earned back. It was resolve. "We're past counting days now," Wyatt said. "We need a plan. Both of us. Together or not at all." Josie stood in the yard, with the cold coming down around her shoulders, and her son safe inside the house, unaware that his whole world had just tilted again, and she felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been braced, and waiting and alone for 10 long months, finally, cautiously, allowing itself to lean on someone else's strength for the first time since Daniel died. "Together," she said. Behind them, in the house, a lamp came on in the kitchen window, Della lighting it early against the coming dark, with Gid's laugh carrying faint, through the glass, 2 children who had no idea yet how close the walls around them had just come to being tested. Wyatt looked toward that light. So did Josie. Neither of them said anything else for a long moment. There wasn't anything left to say that the light in that window hadn't already said for them. But both of them understood, standing there in the cold, with the wind picking back up across the flat unbroken dark of the Kansas plain, that whatever came next, Silas Crane, and the money he'd stolen, and the brother-in-law now circling somewhere close enough to smell. It was coming for all four of them now. Not just for Josie. Not just for her son. For the family this house had quietly, stubbornly become. The letter took 3 days to write, and cost Wyatt more than any letter had ever cost him in his life. He sat at the parlor desk each night, after the house had gone quiet, a single lamp burning, a blank sheet in front of him, that seemed to get wider every time he looked at it. He was not a man who trusted words on paper. Words on paper had a way of outliving the moment that made them true, sitting there in a drawer for years, waiting to be misread by whoever found them next. But this letter needed writing. Because a lawyer in Larkspur, a thin, careful man named Otto Bell, who kept an office above the feed store, and did most of his business drawing up land deeds, had told him plain that if he wanted to stand between Josie's boy and a man with money and a claim, he needed more than good intentions. He needed paper of his own. So he wrote. Crossed out. Wrote again. And on the third night, Josie found him there past midnight. The lamp burned low, 3 balled-up drafts on the floor beside the desk like small crumpled ghosts of every version of himself he hadn't been able to finish being. "You're still up," she said. Quiet. From the doorway. "Can't get it right." "Get what right?" He didn't answer at first. Just looked at the paper in front of him, half a sentence trailing off into nothing. "A statement," he said finally. "For Otto Bell. Says I intend to marry you proper, not on paper only. Says I intend to stand, as father to your boy, before God and this county, and anybody else who wants to argue different." He looked up at her. "Every time I write it down it sounds smaller than it is." Josie crossed the room. Sat in the chair across from him, the same chair she'd sat in the night she showed him the ledger, the night that had started all of this. "Then don't write it small," she said. "Write it the size it actually is." He looked at her a long moment. Something in his face had changed these last weeks. She'd watched it happen, slow, the way you watch a fence line change under new snow, so gradual you can't say exactly, when it stopped looking like the old fence, and started looking like something else entirely. "I'm not good with big words," he said. "You don't need big words," Josie said. "You need true ones. You've got those. I've watched you use them." He picked up the pen again. The days that followed moved fast in a way that frightened her more than the slowness ever had. Because slow, at least, gave you time to brace. Fast just came at you, one thing after another, no room to catch your breath between them. Otto Bell rode out on a Thursday, with news that landed heavy in the kitchen. Cyrus Marsh had filed formal notice, with the county, a petition, dressed up in careful legal language, claiming Josephine Marsh, widow, had abandoned the family seat, and absconded with a minor child, who stood to inherit water rights on land the Marsh family considered theirs by blood, regardless of what the deed said. "He's not asking the county to give him the boy outright," Bell explained, spreading the papers across the kitchen table, his voice dry, and careful the way lawyers' voices always seemed to be, like every word had been weighed twice, before it left his mouth. "He's asking for a hearing. Guardianship review. Says a widow, with no husband, no fixed home, no means of her own, isn't fit to hold custody of an inheriting minor." "I have means," Josie said. Sharp. Too sharp, maybe, but she couldn't help it. "I have work. I have." "You have a household you're not married into," Bell said. Gentle, but not soft. "Which is exactly the hole he means to drive a wagon through. Far as the county's concerned right now, you're a single woman boarding at a rancher's house, with no legal tie binding you here at all." The room went quiet. Josie felt the old cold panic climbing up from somewhere low in her chest, the same panic, from the well collapsing, from the man at the door, with his hat in his hands, from every moment in the last year, where the ground had simply given way beneath her without warning. Wyatt reached over. Set his hand flat on the table, not quite touching hers, but close enough that she understood the gesture for what it was. "Then we close the hole," he said. How soon can a marriage be recorded proper? Before a judge if it needs to be, not just before a preacher. Belle blinked. Looked between the two of them. Fast as you like, he said. County clerk's 2 days' ride. But Sutton, you understand a hasty marriage right, before a custody hearing is going to look exactly like what it is. Convenient. It is convenient, Wyatt said. Flat. Unbothered. Doesn't make it false. Belle studied him a long moment. Then, slow, something like respect crossed his careful lawyer's face. When's the hearing? Josie asked. 3 weeks, Belle said. County seat. Marsh will be there. Likely with counsel of his own, and money enough to make the argument loud. 3 weeks. Josie sat with that number the way she'd once sat, with 26 days. Except this time the clock wasn't counting down toward a stranger deciding whether to keep her. It was counting down toward a stranger deciding whether to take her son. She found the papers 3 nights later, and she was not looking for them. She'd been going through the old trunk in the spare room, the one that had belonged to Cora, that Wyatt kept, but never opened, the way a man keeps a wound closed by simply never looking at it. Della had asked, hesitant, almost shy about it, whether Josie might help her find a particular quilt pattern her mother used to keep, something for a project she wanted to finish, before her mother's birthday came around again in the spring. Josie had said yes before thinking too hard about what saying yes would mean, opening a dead woman's things, with the dead woman's daughter standing right beside her, watching. They found the quilt pattern easily enough, folded near the top. But underneath it, wrapped in a square of yellowed cloth, was a bundle of old correspondence tied, with faded ribbon, and Josie almost set it aside, without a second look. Except one name on the topmost envelope caught her eye, and would not let go. Silas Crane. Della, Josie said, careful. Do you know what these are? Della looked at the bundle a long moment. Something crossed her face, not quite recognition, more like the ghost of a memory too old, and too small to hold on to properly. Mama used to write letters at that desk, she said. Before she got sick. I remember she was upset once. I don't remember why. Josie untied the ribbon with careful fingers. The letters were old, 5 years, maybe 6, predating even Wyatt and Cora's marriage, and some of them, correspondence between Cora and her own father, before he passed the ranch down. And as Josie read through them, slow, the lamp burning low, a shape began to emerge that made her hands go cold. Cora's father had also sold wool to Silas Crane. And in these letters, careful, worried, written in a woman's precise hand, Cora had documented the exact same pattern Josie had found in Wyatt's own ledger. Prices too low. Excuses too consistent. A trust extended for years, and quietly, patiently betrayed. There was one letter near the bottom of the bundle that stopped her cold entirely. Cora, writing to a cousin in another county, laying out her suspicions in plain, careful language, and mentioning, almost in passing, that she intended to confront Crane directly once the spring clip came in. The letter was dated 3 weeks before Cora died. Josie sat very still in the lamplight, the bundle of letters trembling slightly in her hands, and felt something settle into place with the cold, precise click of a lock finally finding its key. Silas Crane had been stealing from this family for longer than anyone knew. Longer than Wyatt knew. He had been stealing from Cora too, from the woman whose photograph still hung in the parlor, whose quilt patterns her daughter still kept folded away like treasure, whose suspicions had died with her before she'd ever gotten the chance to act on them. She showed Wyatt the letters that same night. He read them slow, the same careful way he read everything, and she watched his whole bearing change, not anger exactly, something quieter and worse. Grief, arriving late, finding a new door to walk through. She knew, he said. Quiet. Almost to himself. She knew, and she never told me. Maybe she didn't want to burden you with it before she was certain, Josie said. Maybe she was waiting until she had proof enough that you'd believe her, without a fight. I'd have believed her, Wyatt said. Rough. I'd have believed her over anybody. I know, Josie said. Gentle. I think she knew that too. I think that's exactly why she was being so careful. She wanted to hand you certainty, not suspicion. Wyatt sat with the letters a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of his dead wife's handwriting like he could feel the shape of her still moving through the ink. She never got the chance, he said finally. No, Josie said. But you do. Right now. You've got the chance she didn't. He looked up at her. Grief and resolve, tangled together so tight she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began, settled into a decision on his face. Then we use it, he said. All of it. The ledger. These letters. Everything. Against Crane. Against Crane, Wyatt agreed. And against anybody Crane's been feeding information to. Because if he sold word of you to Cyrus Marsh once, he'll do it again the second it profits him. A man like that doesn't stop, unless somebody makes stopping cost him more than continuing. The plan came together, over the following days, piece by piece, the way good plans always seem to in this house, not in one grand stroke of inspiration, but in small careful additions, one on top of the other, until the shape of the thing was strong enough to hold weight. Otto Bell drew up formal notice, cataloging 4 years of underpayment against the market rate, backed by Josie's careful figures, and now, devastatingly, by Cora's own letters proving the pattern went back further still. Bell would present it to Crane directly, in public, before witnesses, not as accusation but as fact, laid out plain enough that no amount of easy charm could talk its way around it. But it was Josie who insisted on the second part of the plan. The part that made Wyatt go quiet, and still when she first said it out loud. We don't do this alone, she said. Not just the two of us in a kitchen with a ledger. We bring the whole county in. You want to make it public. I want to make it impossible to ignore, Josie said. Cyrus Marsh is coming here counting on you looking like exactly what his petition says. Isolated. Unsteady. A man taking in a stranger out of desperation, no community behind him, easy to paint however he wants to paint you. She leaned forward. So we don't let him paint that picture. We show the county exactly who you are and exactly who I've become in it. Together. Before he ever sets foot in front of a judge. Wyatt studied her a long moment. How? He said. Crane comes through in 10 days for the spring clip. Josie said. Same as every year. We don't confront him quiet, behind closed doors, the way you would have done it before I came. We confront him in the open. In your own yard. With Cooperton there. Ruth Ferris. The Alderfields, the Hollis family, every rancher in this county he's ever shortchanged, and never known it, because I intend to have written to every one of them by the time Crane's wagon comes up that road. You've already started, Wyatt said. Not a question. I started 3 days ago. Josie admitted. I wasn't going to wait for permission to protect this family. His whole face opened at that, not quite surprise, something warmer than surprise, hard to name in the lamplight. This family? He repeated. This family? Josie said. Steady. Not flinching from it. That's what we are now, whether the county clerk's caught up with the paperwork or not. The next 10 days moved like a held breath. Josie rode into Larkspur 3 separate times, letters in her saddlebag, and she watched the town's careful watchfulness begin, slowly, to shift into something else. Not warmth exactly, not yet. But attention. The particular attention a community pays, when it senses something is coming, that will matter to all of them, not just to the household at its center. Cooperton read her figures at the feed store counter, without a word, his broad face going still, and hard the way it did, when he was working something serious over in his mind. He's been cheating me too, hasn't he? He said finally. Flat. Not really a question. I believe so, Josie said. I can show you your own numbers, if you'll let me look at your accounts. Cooperton was quiet a long moment. Then he set down the ledger she'd brought, and looked at her, with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, something close to respect, hard-won and unadorned. "Bring your figures out to the Sutton place, when Crane's due," he said. "I'll be there. And I'll bring my brother-in-law. He's been short on his clip for years, and never once thought to ask why." Ruth Ferris said much the same, and so did the Alderfields, and by the 5th day Josie had a list of 9 families, who had all, independently, in their own quiet ways, been living inside the same slow theft for years, without ever comparing notes on it. 9 families. 9 sets of eyes that would be standing in the Sutton yard, when Silas Crane's wagon came up the road. She rode home each evening bone-tired, and strangely lighter than she'd felt in months, because for the first time, since the well collapsed, and her whole world tilted sideways, she was not simply enduring what was happening to her. She was building something. Deliberately. With her own hands, and her own mind, and she let herself think this now, cautiously, the way you test ice, before trusting your full weight to it, with a man beside her, who had stopped treating her like a stranger borrowing his kitchen, and started treating her like a partner building something that belonged to both of them. Except the ground under her kept shifting, the way ground in this story always seemed to, just when she'd found her footing. It happened on the 8th day, 4 days before Crane was due, when Otto Bell rode out again, faster than usual, dust still rising off his horse's flanks, when he pulled up in the yard. "He's here," Bell said before he'd even fully dismounted. "Marsh. Larkspur. Checked into the boarding house this morning." Josie's stomach dropped clean through the floor. "No," she said. "He's here now. Says he wants to speak with you before the hearing," Bell said. "Directly. Says it's a courtesy, one family member to another." He paused, and his careful lawyer's face went carefully still. "I'd advise against it, if you're asking me. Man like that doesn't offer courtesies. He offers leverage dressed up as courtesy." "I'm not asking you," Josie said. Her voice had gone very quiet, very still, the way it did right before she did something she'd already decided she needed to do regardless of what anyone advised. "I want to see him. On my own terms. Here. Not in some boarding house parlor, where he gets to choose the ground we stand on." Wyatt, who had come to stand beside her, without her quite noticing, when he'd arrived, went rigid. "You want him here," he said. "In this yard. I want him to see exactly what he's up against, before he ever gets near a judge," Josie said. "I want him to see the flock. The house. The girl who calls my son her brother, without anyone having taught her to. I want him to understand, before he wastes a single dollar on a lawyer, that this isn't a desperate woman he can frighten back into line." She looked at Wyatt. "At Bell. Send word," she said. "Tomorrow. Tell him I'll receive him here." Cyrus Marsh arrived the following afternoon in a hired carriage far too fine for the Larkspur road, dust clinging to its polished sides like an insult the land had decided to inflict on him personally. He was not what Josie remembered, from the wedding, 5 years back, younger looking somehow, despite the gray now threading through his temples, his coat cut sharp, and expensive in a way that made every plain thing about the Sutton ranch look, by contrast, exactly as poor as Cyrus clearly wanted it to look. He climbed down, looked around the yard, with an expression of careful, cultivated distaste, the barn, the sagging porch line, that had only recently been repaired, the flock moving slow in the far pasture. "Josephine," he said. Smooth. The particular smoothness of a man who had never once in his life had to raise his voice to get what he wanted. "You've come down in the world." "I've come up, actually," Josie said. "Even. Steady." She had rehearsed this moment a dozen times in her head, over the last 2 sleepless nights, and now that it was here, she found the rehearsal had done its work. Her voice didn't shake at all. "But I imagine we'll disagree about what up and down means, Cyrus. We always did." His eyes moved past her, to Wyatt standing a few feet back, arms crossed, face unreadable in the particular flat way she'd learned meant he was holding something dangerous very carefully in check. And this would be the rancher, Cyrus said. The one my petition mentions. Wyatt Sutton, Wyatt said. He didn't extend a hand. I've heard a great deal about your operation, Cyrus said. Pleasant. Cutting. Struggling, from what I understand. Behind on your accounts for some years now. A man in that position taking in a stranger and her child. One might wonder at the motive. One might. Wyatt agreed. One might also wonder why a man, with land enough of his own, would travel 3 counties chasing a widow and a 6-year-old over water rights he's never once needed in his life. A muscle moved hard in Cyrus's jaw, the first crack Josie had seen in that careful expression since he'd climbed down from the carriage. The boy's inheritance is a family matter, Cyrus said. Stiffer now. Not yours to weigh in on. He's under my roof, Wyatt said. That makes it mine. Cyrus turned back to Josie, dismissing Wyatt with the particular ease of a man who had spent his whole life dismissing people he considered beneath his attention. I'll be plain with you, Josephine, since plainness seems to be the fashion out here, he said. The hearing is 3 weeks off. I can withdraw the petition entirely, today, this hour, if you sign over guardianship of the water rights to the family estate. You keep the boy. You keep whatever life you've built out here. The land simply reverts to where it belongs. Josie felt her whole chest go tight, with a fury so precise and so cold it frightened her a little, the way real fury always did. You want me to sell my son's inheritance, she said, in exchange for you leaving us alone. I want you to be sensible, Cyrus said. You were never suited to that life anyway. Everyone in the family said so. A rancher's wife playing at running an estate. I ran that estate alone, after Daniel died, Josie said. Sharp now, the cold fury finding its voice. I ran it better than your family ever gave me credit for, because none of you ever once bothered to look at the books yourselves. You just assumed a widow couldn't manage. The same way you're assuming right now that I'll hand over my son's future, because you've come all this way in a fine carriage, and used a smooth voice. Cyrus's jaw tightened. The offer stands until the hearing, he said. After that, I intend to fight it properly, in front of a judge, and I intend to win. You have 3 weeks to be sensible, Josephine. I'd think hard about wasting them. He turned, started back toward the carriage, and stopped because Della had appeared on the porch steps, silent as she always was, watching the whole exchange, with the particular unblinking attention of a child who misses nothing. Cyrus looked at her a long beat. Something almost like calculation crossed his face. And who is this? He said. Not unkind exactly. Just cold, the way a man is cold, when he's assessing whether something might be useful to him. That's my daughter, Wyatt said. Flat. Final. A wall going up between Cyrus and the porch steps that no amount of smoothness was going to talk its way through. And she's got nothing to say to you. Della didn't move. Didn't speak. But she held Cyrus's gaze with a steadiness that made even that careful, cultivated man look away first. Cyrus climbed back into his carriage without another word, and it pulled away down the long dirt road, dust rising behind it, until it was nothing but a small dark shape shrinking against the flat white distance. Josie stood very still in the yard a long moment after it had gone. Her hands, she realized, were shaking now that there was no one left to perform steadiness for. Wyatt stepped up beside her. Didn't touch her, not yet, they hadn't reached that place yet, not quite, but stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold coming off the plains. 3 weeks, he said. Quiet. 3 weeks, Josie agreed. We'll be ready, he said. She wanted, badly, to believe him. Silas Crane's wagon came up the Sutton Road 4 days later, exactly on schedule, exactly as it had every spring for longer than anyone in the county could precisely remember. Except this year, it did not arrive to an empty yard. By the time the matched grays pulled the canvas-covered wagon into view, the Sutton yard held 9 other families' worth of ranchers, standing in loose clusters near the barn, arms crossed, faces set in the particular patient stillness of men who had come a long way to hear something they suspected they weren't going to enjoy hearing. Cooperton was there, broad and immovable, as a fence post. Ruth Ferris stood near her husband, arms folded. The Alderfields, the Hollises, 2 families Josie had only met in the last 10 days, but who had come anyway, because word had gotten around, the way word always did in a county this size, and every one of them had a stake in what was about to happen in this yard. Silas Crane climbed down from his wagon, with the easy confidence of a man who had done this exact motion 1,000 times, and expected nothing different this time. Then he looked up. Saw the yard. Saw how many people were standing in it. Fear crossed his face, quick, gone almost before it registered, but Josie caught it, and understood it for exactly what it was. A man realizing, all at once, that the ground he'd been standing on for years was not nearly as solid as he'd believed. Quite a gathering, Crane said. He recovered fast, his voice sliding back into its usual easy warmth. Didn't realize the spring clip had become a social occasion. It hasn't, Wyatt said. He stepped forward, Josie beside him, the ledger and Belle's formal notice in her hands. It's become a reckoning, Silas. Long past due. Crane's easy expression flickered. I don't take your meaning, he said. I think you do, Josie said. She stepped forward, opened the ledger, held it out, where he could see it, without taking it. 4 years of underpayment against market rate. Documented. Every figure cross-checked against the stable growers' price tables, and a signed letter from a cooperative buyer in Abilene willing to pay double what you've been offering this ranch. Crane's eyes moved over the numbers. His jaw tightened. The market, he started. Varies. Josie finished for him. I know. It doesn't vary 9 cents a pound, every year, in the same direction, for 4 years running. Not by accident. She turned to the next page. And it isn't only this ranch, she said. Cooperton here has been underpaid on his clip for 6 years by roughly the same margin. So have the Alderfields. So has Ruth Ferris's husband. I've spoken with every family standing in this yard, Mr. Crane, and every single one of them has the same story, just with different numbers attached to it. The color had drained slow and steady from Crane's face. This is a misunderstanding, he said. His voice had lost some of its easy warmth now, gone thinner, quicker. I've dealt fair with every family in this county for 20 years. Then explain the numbers, Wyatt said. Flat. Final. Explain them to the 9 families standing in this yard, who trusted you the same way I trusted you. The same way Cora trusted you, before she died, still owed money you never paid her. The name landed in the yard like a dropped stone. Because Josie had shown him one more letter the night before, one she'd saved back deliberately, a final piece of Cora's correspondence, dated the week before she died, in which she'd written to her cousin that she intended to confront Crane directly the moment the spring clip came in, and that she had, in her own careful hand, already begun documenting the exact pattern Josie had rediscovered 5 years later. Crane's face had gone the color of old ash. Cora Sutton, he said. Quiet. Almost to himself. She never got the chance, Wyatt said. His voice had dropped low and hard, the voice of a man holding something enormous very carefully in check. She died before she could confront you. But her letters didn't die with her. And now every family in this yard gets to hear, in your own reaction just now, that you knew exactly what you were doing to her, same as you've been doing it to the rest of us. The yard had gone completely silent. 9 families watching. Waiting. Crane looked around at all of them, Cooperton's hard, unmoving face. Ruth Ferris's cold, steady stare. The Alderfields, the Hollises, every rancher he'd quietly shortchanged for years standing in a half-circle around him now, with nowhere left to retreat to. "What do you want?" he said finally. "Quiet. Beaten. Fair price," Josie said. "Full retroactive settlement, calculated against every family's documented clip weights, going back as far as records allow. And going forward, market rate, verified every season against the state price tables, with any family in this county free to check your figures whenever they choose." "That could ruin me," Crane said. "You should have thought of that 4 years ago," Wyatt said. Crane looked around the yard one final time. At the faces. At the ledgers. At the particular unforgiving stillness of men and women who had trusted him, and been quietly robbed for it, standing now in a circle, with nowhere left for him to charm his way through. "All right," he said finally. "Horse. Small. All right. I'll settle. Draw up the terms." Cooperton stepped forward then, slow, deliberate, the way he did everything. "We'll all be drawing up terms," he said. "Every family here. Together. You're not walking out of this yard, with any of us alone in a room again, Silas. Those days are done." Crane's shoulders dropped. Something in him had broken, finally, the way a fence post breaks, after years of rot nobody bothered to check. He nodded. Said nothing more. And the reckoning, for years in the coming, settled itself into the plain, unglamorous business of numbers on paper, exactly the way Josie had always known justice out here would finally have to arrive, not with fists, not with fury, but with figures nobody could argue with, laid out in front of enough witnesses, that no charm in the world could talk its way back out of them. The hearing came 11 days later. The county seat courthouse was a squat brick building, with a single courtroom, that smelled of dust and old paper, and Josie sat in the front row, with her hands folded tight in her lap, Gid pressed close against her side, too young to fully understand what was being decided about his life in this room, but old enough to sense the weight of it in the silence around him. Wyatt sat on her other side. Della beside him, spine straight, chin up, the exact posture Josie had first seen at the ranch, that first cold morning, except now it didn't read as guarded. It read as ready. Cyrus Marsh sat across the aisle, with his lawyer, a thin, precise man who spoke in the same careful cadence Otto Bell used, though with none of Bell's warmth underneath it. The judge, an older man named Harmon, gray-bearded, patient-eyed, the kind of man who had clearly sat through 100 custody disputes, and had long since stopped being surprised by what families were capable of doing to each other, called the room to order. Cyrus's lawyer went first. Laid out the petition in careful, damning language, a widow, without fixed home, without legal tie to the household she'd taken shelter in, a minor child, whose inheritance sat exposed and unprotected in the meantime. He painted Josie exactly the way she'd feared he would, exactly the way she'd spent weeks working to make sure the county would already know wasn't true. Except when it was Otto Bell's turn to speak, the room learned that the county already did no better. Bell called Cooperton first. Then Ruth Ferris. Then 3 other families, from the Larkspur reckoning, each of them standing to testify, plain and unpolished, about the woman who had come into their community as a stranger, and quietly, methodically, without asking anything for herself, exposed the theft that had been draining their families for years. "She didn't have to help us," Cooperton said, standing stiff and awkward in his good coat, clearly uncomfortable in a courtroom, but unwilling to be anywhere else today. "Wasn't her fight. She did it anyway. That tells you something about a person, I'd think. More than any paper does." The judge listened. Took notes. Said little. Then Bell called Wyatt. "Mr. Sutton," Bell said, "tell the court your intentions toward Josephine Marsh and her son." Wyatt stood. Josie watched him cross to the witness chair, watched the particular stiffness in his shoulders. That told her exactly how much this cost a man who had spent most of his life saying as little as possible. "I intend to marry her," Wyatt said. Plain. No hesitation, even though she could see what the plainness cost him. "Not for the sake of this hearing. I'd have gotten there regardless, given time, But I won't pretend the timing's a coincidence, because it isn't, and I'd rather tell this court a true hard thing than a comfortable easy one. He looked at Josie, then at Gid, small and solemn beside her. And I intend to stand, as father to her boy, Wyatt continued. Legally, and every other way a man can stand as one. He's called me that already, in a moment neither of us planned for, and I didn't correct him, and I don't intend to start correcting him now. The courtroom had gone very still. Why should this court believe that's genuine? Cyrus's lawyer said, sharp, standing to cross-examine. And not simply a convenient arrangement constructed in the 11th hour to defeat a legitimate claim? Wyatt looked at him a long moment. Because I buried a wife 2 years ago, he said. Rough now, the words costing him visibly, every syllable pulled up from somewhere deep and guarded. And I know exactly what it looks like when a man is only pretending to care about the people under his roof. I've watched 3 women come through my house and leave it, and every single time my daughter stood on that porch and asked me what she'd done wrong. This is not that. This woman sat up 2 nights with a sick yearling that wasn't even hers to worry over. She found out my wife was cheated by the same man who'd been cheating me, and she made it right for both of us, 4 years too late for Cora, but not too late for anybody else in this county. If that's convenient, Your Honor, I don't know what the word means anymore. The lawyer sat back down without another question. It was Della who ended it, though nobody had planned for her to speak at all. She stood up from the front row before anyone could stop her, small, straight-backed, 7 years old in a courtroom built for grown men's arguments, and said, in a clear, carrying voice that filled the whole quiet room, "May I say something?" The judge looked down at her, surprised, and something in his weathered face softened. "You may, young lady," he said. Della stepped forward. She did not look at Cyrus. She did not look at her father, either, for reassurance, the way most children would have. She looked straight at the judge, the way she looked at everything, careful, direct, unflinching. "Gid is my brother," she said. Simple. Plain. No hesitation in it at all. "I know he isn't really. Not by blood. But 3 women came to our house, before his mama did, and every one of them left, and it wasn't ever because of anything I did wrong, even though it felt that way for a long time." Her voice wavered, just slightly, and she pushed through it anyway. "Gid didn't leave. He got sick, real sick, and I sat with him all night, same as I'd have sat with anybody I loved, and when the fever broke he was still there in the morning. That never happened before. Nobody ever stayed before." She looked, finally, at Cyrus. "You want to take him, because of land," she said. "I don't understand land. I understand that he's my brother, and he calls my papa papa now, and if you take him away, it isn't going to give you back whatever it is you think you lost. It's just going to make 2 more people sad, same as I was sad 3 times already, and I don't think that's fair, and I don't think it's what any of this is really supposed to be for." The courtroom was utterly silent. Cyrus Marsh sat very still at the plaintiff's table, and for the first time, since he'd climbed down from his fine carriage into the Sutton yard, something in his careful, composed face cracked open all the way. He was not, Josie realized, watching him in that silent room, a man who had ever particularly wanted a child. He wanted land. He wanted water rights, and the tidy legal satisfaction of family property staying inside family lines. A 7-year-old girl standing in a courtroom talking about brothers, and sadness and staying, that was a language he had no fluent way to answer in. The judge let the silence sit a long moment, before he spoke. "Thank you," he said to Della, gentle. "You may sit down." She did. Wyatt's hand found her shoulder, as she settled back into her seat, and Josie saw him blink hard, twice, the way a man blinks, when he's fighting something back, that a courtroom isn't the place to let loose. The judge did not rule that day. He took the matter under advisement, the way judges do, and told both parties he would issue his decision within the week. Cyrus's lawyer gathered his papers, with brisk, professional efficiency, and said nothing further. Cyrus himself sat a moment longer than necessary, looking at nothing in particular, before he rose, and walked out of the courtroom, without a word to anyone. Josie caught his eye once, just before he reached the door. And what she saw there wasn't triumph denied, or fury banked and waiting. It was something closer to tiredness. The particular tiredness of a man who had built his whole argument on the assumption that money and land were the only currencies that mattered in a family, and had just watched a 7-year-old dismantle that assumption in under 2 minutes, without raising her voice once. He did not look back again. The ruling came 6 days later, delivered by Otto Bell riding out to the ranch himself rather than trusting it to the mail. Josie watched him come up the road, from the porch, her heart climbing into her throat. With every step his horse took closer, Wyatt beside her, his hand finding hers, without either of them quite deciding to let it happen. The first time, she realized distantly that they'd simply held hands, without a crisis forcing the gesture. Bell dismounted, pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Judge Harmon ruled this morning," he said. No preamble, because he could see, plainly, that neither of them could stand to wait for one. Petition denied. Full custody and guardianship remains, with Josephine, effective immediately, with the court noting. He glanced down at the paper, reading the exact language. Noting the demonstrated stability of the household, the documented character of both petitioning parties, and, in the judge's own words, the compelling and unprompted testimony of the minor Della Sutton, which the court found more persuasive than any submitted document. Josie's knees nearly gave out beneath her. Wyatt's hand tightened around hers, steady, holding her up, without either of them naming what he was doing. And the land? Josie managed. The water rights. Held in trust for the boy, until he comes of age, Bell said. Administered by you, as his mother, with no claim whatsoever remaining to Cyrus Marsh, or the Marsh estate. The judge was, if I'm reading between these lines correctly, considerably unimpressed by the timing and manner of the petition to begin with. Josie let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 10 months straight. She looked at Wyatt. He looked back at her, and something in his careful, weathered face had come all the way open now, no wall left standing behind it at all. "It's done," she said. Quiet. Almost disbelieving. "It's actually done." "It's done," he agreed. Behind them, on the porch steps, Della and Gid had appeared, drawn by the sound of Bell's horse, and Della, careful, watchful Della, who had spent 2 years bracing for every departure, before it came, looked at her father's face, and Josie's, and understood immediately, the way children always seem to understand the things that matter most, before anyone finds the words to explain them. "We won," she said. Not a question. "We won," Wyatt said. Della let out a whoop that Josie had never once heard from her in all the weeks they'd lived under the same roof, a real, unguarded, purely childish sound of joy, and she grabbed Gid's hand, and the two of them went tearing off across the yard toward the barn, toward Willow, toward the flock, toward the wide flat pasture that was, finally, unquestionably, going to stay theirs. They were married 3 weeks later, in the small Larkspur church, with the bell that had gone slightly out of tune. Half the county turned out, Cooperton in his good coat, Ruth Ferris with the bouquet of early wildflowers she'd cut herself that morning, the Alderfields, the Hollises, every family who had stood in that yard the day Silas Crane's wagon came up the road, and left it, finally, with an honest reckoning behind him. Cyrus Marsh sent nothing. No letter, no word, no acknowledgement that the family he tried to dismantle had, instead, simply become stronger for having survived him, and Josie found she did not need anything from him at all. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Gid, 6 years old, utterly without guile, announced to the whole congregation that he did not, because Wyatt was his papa already, and the church laughed warm and unguarded, and Josie cried the good kind of tears, the kind that come from a chest finally allowed to unclench. Summer came to the Sutton Ranch, the Reed Sutton Ranch, now, though nobody in Larkspur ever quite managed the whole mouthful, and it settled, comfortably, into just being called the Sutton place, the way names do, when a family has finally, fully, become one thing instead of two. Willow grazed in the far pasture, grown fat and calm, the kind of animal other sheep drifted toward, when something startled the flock, exactly the way Josie had once quietly hoped she might. Della had finished her drawing of the whole flock, every animal accounted for, pinned now to the wall beside her bed next to the sketch of the horse, and the row of smooth stones on the windowsill. Gid had gotten his horse, a gentle, patient old mare Wyatt had picked out himself, and the boy rode her every evening he was allowed to, Della trotting alongside on her own pony, the two of them inseparable in the particular fierce loyal way of siblings, who had chosen each other rather than simply been born into the arrangement. The porch no longer sagged. The house had a fresh coat of paint, applied one warm week by all four of them together, Josie and Wyatt on the ladders, and the children, with their smaller brushes working the low sections, nobody keeping score of who'd done more, because that had stopped being how this family measured itself somewhere back in the winter, in a barn, over a sick yearling neither of them had been obligated to save. One evening in late August, 7 months almost to the day, since a train had surrendered itself, onto a platform the color of old bone, Josie stood at the fence, and watched the flock graze in the long gold light, Wyatt beside her, his arms settled easy around her shoulders in a way that had become as natural now as breathing. "You ever think about it?" he said. "Quiet. That first morning on the platform. What you'd have done, if I turned around, and got straight back on that train." Josie thought about it. About the cold. About Gid's small hand in hers, about $14.60 folded flat in her coat pocket, about the letter folded soft, as cloth against her ribs, about every version of this story that could have unfolded from that one frightened moment and hadn't. "I think about it," she said. "Not often anymore. But I think about it." "I almost did," Wyatt admitted. Rough, honest, the way he said most things that mattered. For about half a minute. Standing right there on that platform. I looked at you, and I looked at that boy, and I thought, this isn't what I asked for in the letter. What changed your mind? He was quiet a moment, watching the flock, the particular slow, unhurried movement of animals, that had no reason left to be afraid of anything. "The storm," he said finally. "Practical reason first. Couldn't rightly send a woman and a child back out into weather like that." He looked at her. "But somewhere between the station and the house, it stopped being about the storm. I looked over at you managing that boy steady as anything, not once complaining about the cold, or the silence, or the fact that I wasn't exactly rolling out a welcome. And I thought, well, I thought maybe I hadn't asked for the right thing in that letter at all. Maybe I'd asked for steady character and willing disposition, because I didn't know, yet there was a bigger word I actually needed." "What word was that?" Josie asked, though she thought she already knew. Wyatt looked at her a long moment, the gold evening light catching the gray just starting at his temples, the small permanent crease between his brows, that had, these last months, softened considerably from what it had been the day she met him. "Home," he said. "Simple. Rough. True. I didn't know how to ask for a home in a letter. Didn't think it was the kind of thing you could put in an advertisement." He pulled her closer against his side. "Turned out I didn't have to ask for it directly at all. It just walked off a train one cold morning, with a boy holding its hand, and I was too stubborn to see it clear, until a lot later than I should have." Josie leaned into him, watching the flock move slow and unhurried across the gold-lit pasture, Della and Gid's laughter carrying faint from somewhere near the barn, and she thought about the woman who had stepped off that train 7 months ago, with $14.60 and a single trunk and a secret folded 4 times against her ribs. That woman had believed, deep down, that she was simply looking for somewhere safe to hide. She understood now, standing in this particular gold light, with this particular man's arm around her shoulders, and these particular 2 children's laughter drifting across a pasture that belonged, fully and legally, and completely, to all 4 of them together, that she had not been looking for a hiding place at all. She had been looking for exactly this. She simply hadn't known its name yet. The wind moved soft across the Kansas grass, warm now, nothing like the teeth it had carried the night she arrived. The flock grazed on, unhurried, unafraid. And somewhere behind them, in a kitchen that had once held 3 mismatched chairs for a family too small, and too grieving to need a fourth, 5 places were set now every single evening, and nobody in that house had needed a single word to explain when, exactly, that had stopped feeling like borrowed space, and started feeling, simply, permanently, like home.